In today's episode, we'll discuss the B&M floorless coaster that outlived the park that constructed it. Welcome to Airtime Traveler. Hey everybody, welcome to the Roller Coaster History Podcast. You are listening to Airtime Traveler. My name is Nathan Grace, and I'm joined by my wife and lovely co-host.
Hi, I'm Haley Grace.
And thank you so much for tuning in to episode 5. If you haven't had a chance to listen to our other 4 episodes, go ahead and go check those episodes out, either after you're done listening to this episode or go check them out right now. And also, last week we did our very first trip report. So we just got back from a trip to King's Dominion and Kings Island. We'll be doing a trip report for Kings Island probably this week. We'll record that. But for now, you can go and listen to our trip report from King's Dominion and hear about our experience that we had there. It was a lot of fun.
It was so much fun.
Yeah, we had a good trip at King's Dominion. And today we are going to be talking about one of the roller coasters at King's Dominion. So if you've never tuned into the podcast, so we each episode, we take one roller coaster and we dive into the history of that individual roller coaster. I am a roller coaster enthusiast and have been for a long time, and my wife Haley is a member of the GP, or the general public, and so she doesn't know the history as much as I do, and so I'm here to share the story with her and with all of you guys. And we've had a lot of fun doing the podcast, and I think I'm excited to start sharing the stories of some of these new coasters that we got to ride in the past couple weeks.
Yes.
Yeah, so you have anything else you want to add to our intro? Any fun stories you've seen in the coaster world lately?
I mean, we saw that Grizzly was closed down today.
Yeah, so I couldn't find anything about that, so I don't know if you just saw someone post about it.
It was on Facebook, but did you look on the app to see if they actually closed it?
I can't. The app won't let me see like wait times or anything if I'm not in the park, so I couldn't get any more information. Basically, we heard that Grizzly had some maintenance issues this morning, and that King's Dominion has announced that it's closed until further notice. So that's just the rumor that we've heard, and we haven't really seen it anywhere else. But I think the other big piece of news we saw in the industry, I think in the past couple of days, we've seen it that they started offering what are they called? Sick bags for people that are riding Cosmic Rewind, because it just opened. I think yesterday was opening day for the general public. So anyway, that's interesting. A lot of people getting sick on Cosmic Rewind.
I don't see where I saw it, but
the Grizzly thing.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Well, we'll have to keep tabs on that and see. So, but definitely the sick bag thing on Cosmic Rewind. It's not the first time Disney's done that though. Like there's still, if you go on Mission Space, they still have sick bags. Like in the ride vehicle for people that are going on that ride. So
really, I didn't know that. I've never noticed it before, at least.
Yeah, so it's not the first time that's happened on a Disney ride, but all right. So today we are going to be talking about one of the roller coasters at King's Dominion. As I said, we are going to be talking about Dominator. So that is today's topic. So like I said, we did a trip report last week where we go into more depth in our experience with Dominator, but just really briefly, I really enjoyed Dominator. It's the first floorless coaster that I've been on, but I have been on a couple other B&M Looper coasters, and it's my favorite one I've been on so far. I really enjoyed it. I think I mentioned this in our trip report, but I like how the inversions are broken up by other elements. Like there's a bank turn in a couple of the sections of the ride, and there's a low to the ground helix at the end of the ride. So just some more interesting elements that you don't typically see in these B&M loopers. Now, and then I'll let you just briefly talk about your experience. Haley doesn't particularly enjoy the B&M over the shoulder restraint, so that kind of tarnishes the experience for her, I think.
Yeah, I feel like it was a very unique and fun coaster, like built wise, but like Nathan said, the restraints give me quite a bit of headache and kind of make me really lightheaded just because I'm shorter. I'm 5'3", and so my head kind of rattles around against the shoulder restraints, and so it's like a little bit more rough of an experience for me. Um, so I don't know if like the average height person would be more equipped to ride that ride, but I personally don't like things that give me a headache and make me dizzy. So,
Yeah.
It is what it is.
It's interesting because the generally speaking, coaster enthusiasts prefer the over the shoulder restraints as opposed to the vest restraints like they have on Banshee. But for me personally, I would
I
love,
liked the vest
yeah, I love the
restraints.
vest restraints. I didn't really have an issue with them, so I would really enjoy it if they put vest restraints on all of their coasters. But I know that's never going to happen. So
I wonder if they just don't like them because of the how far out they go, so it's like a little bit more less visualization of the coaster around them. But
well, some people say that because the way the over the shoulder restraints work, you have a little bit more room like in between for like those vest restraints. They come direct like in direct contact with your body.
mm-hmm.
So people say coaster enthusiasts would say you don't get as much airtime, like you're not necessarily coming out of your seat as much, and that may be true, but for me, like I don't know, it just doesn't bother me as much. I don't personally, those vest restraints don't bother me. And I actually, when we rode Banshee, I really liked the vest restraints because I could just focus. I didn't have to ride defensively. Like I could just enjoy the coaster for what it
Yeah.
was and not have to worry about any headbanging. And
Yeah.
I liked that. So
It was fun. I liked Banshee a lot.
Banshee was really good. So, and we'll talk more about Banshee when we do our Kings Island trip report. But it was a lot of fun. So, well, Dominator is generally considered the third best coaster at Kings Dominion. It's the longest floorless B&M coaster in the world, and as such is praised as being one of the better B&M looping coasters. It opened in 2000, and it didn't debut in the top 50 in the Golden Ticket Awards when it like was first constructed, but it moved into the top 50 in 2005 and then was in the top 50 for 9 years until it dropped out in 2014. So it's kind of interesting how it like started outside the top 50 and then moved into the top 50 and then dropped back out of the top. So
that is interesting.
Got better with age and then got worse with more age. I don't know. It's kind of interesting how the general the Golden Ticket Awards rated it. In the Coaster Bot rankings, it currently ranks number 96 in the country. This puts it below other B&M loopers such as Kumba at Busch Gardens Tampa, Incredible Hulk at Universal Orlando, and Kraken at SeaWorld Orlando. Puts it above other B&M loopers such as Wildfire at Silver Dollar City, Hydra the Revenge at Dorney Park, and Rougarou at Cedar Point. At Kings Dominion, like I said, it ranks third among most people, and it does also rank third in the Coaster Bot rankings. So Twisted Timbers is ranked number 1 as number 9 in the country. Intimidator 305 at number 18 in the country. And then it's a pretty big drop off. Dominator's 96, Flight of Fear 169. And then from there, Racer 75, Backlot Stunt Coaster, Grizzly, Reptilian, Anaconda, Apple's Apple, Woodstock Express. And then Toonbeely is new, so it's not in the Coaster Bot rankings yet. So that's just a little brief history, a little bit about or not so much history, but about what other people's experience with Dominator is. So now let's talk about the history behind Dominator. And we're going to go back to 1887.
Wow.
Alrighty, 1887. Why so far back, you ask?
Yeah.
Why all the way back to 1887 for a steel coaster? That's because this coaster would not exist if it were not for an amusement park that was founded in 1887. So in Aurora, Ohio, a recreational park was founded adjacent to the town's lake known as Geauga Lake. The park was named Geauga Lake Park.
Wow.
Very creative. And
That's lame.
The park was used for Major League Baseball games on Sundays in 1888. That only lasted a year, though, because the following year, in 1889, park officials added their first ride, which was a steam-powered carousel, which I thought was pretty cool. I wish there were more of those around, because that's really fascinating. So, the carousel remained the only ride until 1925, when the park added their first coaster, the Big Dipper. The coaster at the time was the largest and fastest in the world and instantly put Geauga Lake Park on the map. This coaster was followed by a dance hall, a racetrack, a bowling alley, a theater, and a rolling rink. This is an interesting. Can you imagine if that was how amusement parks were these days? Like you go there and they had like one coaster, and then it was like a dance hall, a racetrack, a bowling alley, like just not typically what you're thinking when you think of amusement park.
But I guess like back in that age, it might have been common.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It definitely is more common than it is nowadays. So they continued to add more and more things to the park. This trend continued until a large fire occurred in 1952. The fire destroyed a significant portion of the park, causing damages of $500,000, which is about $5.5 million of damage nowadays.
That's insane.
It's interesting because if you go back and look at the history of like a lot of old amusement parks or like a lot of old towns, it seems like everything had a large fire at some point in the early 1900s. Like things were just catching fire left and right. It just
fire departments needed.
I know. So, yeah. So $5.5 million in damages in today's money. But despite the damages, the park was purchased by Funtime Incorporated in 1969. Now, Funtime was formed by 3 former managers of Cedar Point. And this is interesting because Cedar Point and Geauga Lake are only about an hour and a half away from each other. So Geauga Lake is like just outside of Cleveland. So it's not that far from where you grew up, actually. I'm kind of curious. I don't have my phone on me, so I couldn't look. But I mean, Cedar Point's only, 3.5 hours from the Pittsburgh area. So Geauga Lake is probably only a couple hours, maybe 2.5 hours from where you grew up. So it's interesting. They, these former managers of Cedar Point purchased this park. They're only 80 miles apart.
How do you spell Geauga?
It's Geauga. Geauga.
I'm very curious.
Yeah, I'm being interested to see how far it is from your neck of the woods. I bet it's only 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So, but yeah, these former managers of Cedar Point, they wanted to build a park that could compete with Cedar Point for the Cleveland market.
2 hours, 22 minutes.
There you go. So not that far from your neck of the woods. So in 1970, Funtime had owned the park for a year at this point, and here's just some early pictures of the park. So you can see this is these old timey vehicles. This is like an old postcard of the entrance of the park, and you would like enter underneath one of the hills of the coaster, which is kind of cool.
Kind of like how Cedar Point has it now, right?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So, but obviously back then, Gatekeeper wasn't at Cedar Point, back when this was going on. But it is interesting that kind of the comparison there. So in 1970, the now owners of Geauga Lake convinced SeaWorld to come in and build a park right across the lake from Geauga. So Geauga Lake it's like an actual lake that's in Aurora, Ohio. And Geauga Lake Park was on one side of the lake, and they convinced SeaWorld to come in and build a SeaWorld park on the other side of the lake.
Is it still there?
Well, we're gonna get into that. So,
Sorry, getting ahead of myself.
but it was interesting though because usually you wouldn't typically ask another major attraction to come in, but they kind of worked together as like they wanted to turn the town into like people could come there and spend like a weekend at the town, and you'd spend like one day at Geauga Lake and you'd spend another day at SeaWorld Cleveland as it was called. And so they had like ticket bundles and like they kind of worked hand in hand together.
Hmm.
It was a pretty ingenious concept actually. It kind of helped boost the park in the public eye and convince more people to come there. Come. So it was interesting. I saw this article that in the newspaper. The title of the article was Ohio Parks Claim They Can Rival Disneyland.
No.
I just thought that was really funny, and it goes on the article, and they talked to Cedar Point, Kings Island, and Geauga Lake in this article, and specifically Geauga Lake officials were the ones that were saying that like they could compete with Disneyland, mostly because they were saying like we have SeaWorld here. So you can get like the animal experiences, and you can come see these shows, and then you come across the lake to our park, and you can ride the roller coasters and stuff like that. So throughout the 70s, they were just constantly. Fun Type Park wanted to blow this park wide open.
Hmm.
So from 1887 to 1970, it just been like a local theme park. They had one roller coaster. They had added a few rides here and there. But when Fun Time took over, they were like, we are going to turn this into a destination theme park.
Hmm.
So by 1978, they had already added a log flume, an observation tower, and a new roller coaster in 76, 77, and 78.
Wow.
So they were just like boom, boom, boom. They were adding things like crazy. I was thinking about that. Can you imagine if Silver Dollar City built a new roller coaster 3 years in a row? Like that would be.
We can only pray that they would
I
do
know.
that.
I
don't
would
think
love
that ever
that,
happened, but
yeah. So two of these coasters featured inversions, meaning Geauga Lake had two inverting coasters before Cedar Point did. So it's interesting to kind of see how Geauga Lake is already pushing the boundaries to try to one up Cedar Point when Cedar Point's only like an hour, hour and a half away. It was clear that the park wanted to rival the nearby Cedar Point and Kings Island, and not only were they, not only did they want to do that, but they were willing to put in the money and the investments to do so. The new coasters, like I said, were 76, 77, 78, and then from there it kind of stopped. The park was still really successful. Like a lot of people were coming in, but they weren't like adding coasters like crazy like they were. During this time, SeaWorld had mentioned interest in buying Geauga Lake and kind of turning everything into one park, but nothing really materialized from that. So in 1988, the park celebrated its centennial with its first new roller coaster in 10 years. So they opened this coaster, which is Raging Wolf Bob's, which is a large wooden coaster built by the Din Corporation. Okay, I gotta ask you, what do you think of that name, Raging Wolf Bob's?
What's a wolf bob?
I have no idea because it makes me think of.
Did they have a pet wolf named Bob?
maybe
that was raging.
Maybe that's what it was.
They had a raging wolf named Bob,
and that's where the name of the coaster comes from.
Right.
It makes me think of a bobsled coaster, but it's not.
It's not.
It's just a wooden coaster. I mean, it looks fun based on the pictures, but yeah, Raging Wolf Bob's. It's
You'll have
interesting.
to look that up and see.
Yeah. So throughout the late 80s and early 90s, the park added a few flat rides, but how Fun Time when they took over, they were just adding things like crazy, but at this point they just seemed kind of content, just like the park's good as it is. So. But that would change in 1995. So in August 15th, 1995, Premier Parks announced that they had purchased Funtime Incorporated for $60 million, about $114 million nowadays. And this included the acquisition of Darien Lake, which is an amusement park in New York. I think you say this Wyandotte Lake in Columbus, which was a much smaller park and only had a couple coasters. and Geauga Lake. So Funtime had seemed pretty content with the park's current status, like I said, but Premier Parks was anxious to inject new life into these parks, particularly Geauga Lake and Darien Lake, because those ones, the other one was actually ended up getting absorbed into a zoo. So the Columbus Zoo now has it has a couple roller coasters there at the Columbus Zoo actually.
They do?
Or yeah, there's like two coasters there, I think, because it used to be right next door to the amusement park, and then it just kind of got
I've been to the
absorbed.
Columbus Zoo. How did I not know this before?
Oh, yeah. So
I'll have
it's
to go because I really like the Columbus Zoo.
yeah,
That way you can get your coaster credits.
yeah, I get a couple credits there. So, but they were really anxious to pump new life into Darien Lake and Geauga Lake. So in '96, they added a new coaster to Geauga Lake and Darien Lake. In '97, they added a water park to Geauga Lake and a new coaster to Darien Lake. '98, they added a new roller coaster to both of them. In '99, they added a roller coaster at Darien Lake and a couple flat rides at Geauga Lake. So they're just
wow,
constantly. So like the same thing that happened with Funtime back in the '70s is now happening again in the '90s.
Did they remove anything?
I'm sure they removed things here and there. I think there was a Wild Mouse coaster that got removed, but nothing super significant. I do think one of the inverting coasters that they built in the '70s, I think one of them got removed, but one of them stayed because they were pretty similar. They were both built by the same company. So while all of this is happening, Premier Parks is not only continuing to expand these parks, but they're buying amusement parks like crazy. So in '96 and '97, they bought Elitch Gardens, Waterworld USA, Riverside Park, Great Escape, Adventure World, Kentucky Kingdom, and the European Wallaby Parks. So, and that's just the major ones. They also bought like small water parks here and there, but they were going crazy. They were just buying amusement parks left and right, and building this little empire of amusement parks.
Wonder if did they go bankrupt?
Well, yes and no. we'll get to that. So
I was gonna say that. I feel like
you'll understand why that's a yes and a no.
Okay.
So in 1998, the biggest change of all happens when Premier Parks purchased Six Flags from Time Warner for $1.86 billion. So Time Warner Six Flags had been struggling for the past decade. It wasn't looking good, and Time Warner was eager to get rid of it and not have to worry about the amusement park industry anymore. So Premier Parks bought all of the Six Flags properties, so all of the parks that they owned, and now had the rights to Six Flags. So they actually, instead of rebranding all the Six Flags parks to be Premier Parks, they took the Six Flags name and so now Premier Parks is called Six Flags. So I think they figured that was just easier to brand it that way. Like people recognize the Six Flags name.
Yeah.
So when they did that, they began to rebrand their parks that they already owned. So Darien Lake became Six Flags Darien Lake. Same with Elitch Gardens and Kentucky Kingdom. Riverside Park became Six Flags New England. Wallaby Flavo became Six Flags Holland. Adventure World became Six Flags America, etc., etc. So
are they all still there?
Most of these parks are still there, yeah.
Huh.
So and most of them still carry the Six Flags moniker these days because Six Flags, most of these, I'm just kind of looking through them. Kentucky Kingdom isn't. Elitch Gardens isn't, because Kentucky Kingdom's actually owned by Hershey now, which is Silver Dollar City and Dollywood. But it was at one point, it was Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom was the name of the park. So, but yeah, Six Flags New England, that's the new name of the park and still is to this day. Six Flags America, still the same way. So some of these changes are still in effect to this day from this purchase in 1998. And now lastly, and most important for our story, Geauga Lake was rebranded as Six Flags Ohio. And as part of this major overhaul, Six Flags was going to add 21 new roller coasters across the whole chain. So all these new parks, they were adding 21 coasters. This included 4 new coasters that came to Six Flags Ohio just in the year 2000. and 20 other rides. So they just literally they took this park, and I think I read that they invested $40 million into the park in one off season, which is crazy. So here are the four coasters that they built. So they built the Villain,
Uh-huh.
a CCI wooden coaster. They built, what is it? Superman Ultimate Escape, which was an intimate impulse coaster. They built Roadrunner Express, which was a family coaster, and then Batman Night Flight, which was a B&M floorless coaster. Okay, so that was the other thing. Now with Six Flags, now they have the DC and Looney Tunes properties that they can use in the park. Um, so Six Flags is rapidly increasing the size of Six Flags Ohio. And as this is happening, SeaWorld is kind of transitioning, like not just SeaWorld Ohio, but all of the SeaWorld properties are kind of transitioning from getting away from marine park to full blown amusement park. So they start constructing new roller coasters, which to this point SeaWorld hadn't built any like big attractions other than I think we talked about Journey to Atlantis in our first episode, which was that water coaster. I think that was built in 97, 98. Okay. So that was like their first roller coaster that they had put into SeaWorld Orlando. And then from here, they start building more roller coasters. And this is in 2000. So around the same time period that all this is going on. However, SeaWorld was a little nervous about the Ohio market because of Cedar Point and Kings Island. So, and Geauga Lake right next door, or not Geauga Lake, it's now Six Flags Ohio.
Yeah.
So SeaWorld was kind of like, there's no way we can compete with all this. Like, we're already way too far behind in the coaster game. So instead, they offered to buy Six Flags Ohio. So they're like, what if we just buy the coasters and everything there, and we'll just kind of absorb that into one park? Six Flags said no, but instead they counteroffered and said, what if we buy SeaWorld Cleveland? And SeaWorld accepted. So that's why there's no longer a SeaWorld in Cleveland, because in 2000, Six Flags bought it. And so now everything around the whole lake is now one big amusement park. And as part of this, they rebranded the whole park. Oh, sorry, here's a map of Six Flags Ohio before the purchase happened. Okay. So then after the purchase, they rebranded the whole park as Six Flags Worlds of Adventure. So, and the idea behind it was they marketed it as 3 parks in one. So, because there was a water park there, they had the typical amusement park, and now with the acquisition of SeaWorld, they now had a marine life park. So they kind of advertised it as like 1 park or 3 parks in one, and 1 park, 3 experiences type of thing. And so the whole Worlds of Adventure name was kind of to mimic that.
Yeah, to like combine all.
Exactly. So Six Flags rebranded the park. At a size of 700 acres, Worlds of Adventure was the largest amusement park in the world at the time. So by comparison, Cedar Point is about 350 acres, so about half the size. And Animal Kingdom, which is massive, even though most of it is like the fields and
right.
like what's the ride?
Kilimanjaro.
Thank you. So Kilimanjaro Safari takes up a large portion of Animal Kingdom's land, but Animal Kingdom's total property is 580 acres. So this is even bigger than Animal Kingdom. So this park is huge. And that becomes a blessing and a curse, as we're going to get into. So, but to celebrate the new, addition, they added another coaster in 2001. So Six Flags are just spending money left and right at this point, right?
I was going to say, that's a lot of cash.
Yeah, they are just...
a lot of cheddar being put into it.
They are pumping money into this park. And the SeaWorld side became known as the wildlife area. I think I have a map here. So now all of this on this side of the lake is basically all the SeaWorld stuff. So you can see here's animal adventure. What else? There's the wildlife. So the weird thing about how the park was set up, because it was 2 separate parks essentially, is it actually had a north gate and a south gate. So you can see it says north gate here and south gate down here. So you could enter for multiple locations in the park, which was probably good considering how big it was, but
Right.
also could be confusing for some
Right.
people. So, and then they built this big long wooden bridge right here so that there was a way, like, so they had to build a path here obviously to get you from one park to the next, and then they had to build this bridge across the lake so that you could get, basically turn the whole thing to a big circle.
Circle, yeah.
Um, so let's see. The SeaWorld became the wildlife area. In 2001, the park had plans to construct a 200-foot hypercoaster on the SeaWorld side of the park, but those plans were abandoned due to height restrictions. I guess on the north side of the lake, they got approval to build rides, 200, 300 feet. But on the south side of the lake, they couldn't go above 35 feet, which is interesting. I don't know if the people or the city just wanted you to be able to see the lake from one side and
Hmm.
not necessarily the other. I don't know. That was just some of the zoning restrictions that they had to deal with, which some people say that's why SeaWorld eventually decided to sell the park, because even if they wanted to build roller coasters, they couldn't, because they were all, SeaWorld was completely on that end of the park and had
Right.
the more strict zoning restrictions. Um, the park, like I said, the park market itself is three parks in one. Many saw it as Six Flags' attempt to be the Disneyland of the North, because you had Disneyland in California, Disney World in Florida, but there wasn't like a huge park up in the north. I mean, Cedar Point, I guess, but Cedar Point's more like a coaster thrill park. They were trying to make this like a family park, like you could bring the kids to do the Looney Tune stuff, but there was also big coasters for you, and then you could go to the SeaWorld stuff and do things all together as a family. So it was an interesting, like they were trying to market
It
this as
sounds
like,
like fun.
right. It's an interesting concept, and Six Flags is really trying to make this a big investment for them. As the next several years go on, Six Flags is still continuing to struggle. The chain had, like we've been talking about, the chain was adding rides and attractions like crazy, not just to this park, but all the parks. Because, like I said, in 2000, they bought 21 coasters alone.
Yeah.
Um, and they were continuing to do that over the next several years. But ticket sales were not compensating for the amount of money that they were paying for all these new attractions. So the company was losing money at this point. The company's growing debt was becoming a serious problem, and board members were under fire for answers. Worlds of Adventure was also experiencing declining attendance at this point. So, after a 43% increase in attendance in 2000, so when it went from Geauga Lake to Six Flags Ohio, they increased 43%, which is that's
It's a
awesome.
big
That's a
jump.
jump,
Yeah.
big jump. But then 2001, when they bought SeaWorld and went to Worlds of Adventure, attendance actually decreased in 2001.
Interesting.
So
I wonder why.
I, it is interesting that they expand this park and attendance actually decreased, and then it decreased a little bit more in 2002, a little bit more in 2003. They were still bringing in 2 million people a year, which is a big number, but for the amount of money that they had pumped into the park, they were expecting better.
More.
They were
Yeah.
expecting better numbers. In 2004, Six Flags began to close and sell properties in an effort to help alleviate the company's growing debt. So on March 10th, Six Flags sold off all of its European parks except for one. And then in April of that year, Six Flags determined that the investment required to keep Worlds of Adventure competitive with Cedar Point would be too great. And so that mixed with the amount of debt they were in, and they were desperate to find ways to pay off some of their debt. They decided to sell Worlds of Adventure. Any guesses who they sold it to?
Cedar Fair.
They did. They sold it to Cedar Fair for $145 million. Now, this is where things get really interesting, because people were immediately very suspicious of Cedar Fair buying a park that was that close to
Cedar Point.
their flagship park,
Yeah.
right? So it seemed really strange, and people were like, well, maybe this is going to be the family park, and Cedar Point is going to be the thrill park. And that's kind of how they'll brand it. Um, so following the purchase, Cedar Fair had to drastically overhaul the park, because they don't have rights to the DC characters or Looney Tunes or any of that. So they had to start changing all these rides. here's a picture of before the purchase, just to give you an idea of kind of what the park looked like. You can see there's that big long wooden bridge that they built, and so all the big tall rides on the side, and then the
What's the
SeaWorld
field?
stuff
That massive field
back here.
Yeah, what is
That's the
that?
park. Those are the parking lots.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So, and then there's more parking like down here for the SeaWorld side of the park. So, so they start rebranding all of these rides, and one of let's see, so they rebranded Superman Ultimate Escape as Steel Venom, Roadrunner Express as Beaverland Mine Ride, and most importantly, Batman Night Flight became Dominator. So that's where our story comes in. That Dominator that is at Geauga Lake is the same Dominator that sits at King's Dominion today.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Is it? And it's like not a replica. It's like the same exact
It is the
thing.
same. So let's talk about how this happens.
Interesting.
Okay. So after Cedar Fair's acquisition, their first order of business was to remove the marine park and replace it with a brand new water park. So Cedar Fair doesn't have any parks that do any kind of animal. Like Six Flags has a few. Six Flags has one in New Jersey and one in California that have like zoo type elements and some marine park stuff. So Six Flags was equipped to deal with that, but Cedar Fair didn't want to touch that. So when Six Flags sold the park, Six Flags took all their animals and moved them to other parks in the chain. And Cedar Fair just leveled all the SeaWorld stuff and put in a water park instead. So at that point, they renamed the park back to Geauga Lake. So it was just known as Geauga Lake. But then they added Wild Water Kingdom, which was the new water park. So it was, I think the official name was Geauga Lake, and Wild Water Kingdom was the full name of the park. So, and it seemed like they were moving it to be like a family style park with the addition of a water park. So, unfortunately, over the next several years, attendance took a steep decline. So, while World's Adventure, I told you, had been about 2 million guests in 2003, in 2004, after they had purchased Geauga Lake, attendance dipped below 800,000.
Wow.
So huge drop in attendance.
That's major.
Mm-hmm. So following the 2006 season, Cedar Fair, so this goes on for a couple more years that the attendance is 800, 750,000 a year. Not great. So in 2006, Cedar Fair made the decision to remove two coasters from Geauga Lake and relocate them to other parks in the chain. So X Flight, which was the most recent coaster, was relocated to the newly acquired Kings Island. So I think they bought Kings Island and Kings Dominion in, it was either 2005 or 2006. I think so. I'd have to go and check, but it was during that time period that they had bought them, and as well as some other parks. But those are the two that are most pertinent to our story. So they moved X Flight to Kings Island and renamed it to Firehawk, which Firehawk is no longer there, but it used to be where Orion is now.
Okay.
So they removed it, I think, in 2018. So, and then they moved Steel Venom over to Dorney Park, and Steel Venom still runs at Dorney Park to this day. It's now called Possessed, is the name of the coaster now. So Geauga Lake still had 8 coasters, but the removal of coasters is never a good sign for an amusement park.
Right.
I try to imagine what that would be like if Silver Dollar City just announced that they were removing, I don't know, if they're removing Powder Keg and sending it to another park. Like, that would be crazy.
It would be depressing.
It'd be really sad. Like, if it was your favorite ride at, Geauga Lake and they just sent it off to another park, like, that would, that not only would that be sad, but that would make me nervous. So, but nothing had been like made official. Like Cedar Fair, the park was still open, obviously, and people were still coming, and Cedar Fair hadn't made any announcements. So, Geauga Lake opened as normal for the 2007 season, and then they were open all the way through. They had decreased the schedule, so it was just from Memorial Day to Labor Day was when the park was open. So the park closed for the year on September 16th, and just 5 days later, with no warning, Cedar Fair announced that Geauga Lake would never open again.
Oh my gosh, could you imagine that? Like,
That is wild. To not even like we talked. Was it? Yeah, it was our last episode. We talked about Phantom's Revenge, and we talked about how Kenny Wood was really good about like when a ride is going to close. Like they would announce it for at the beginning of the year, so people had a chance to come and ride it one more time.
yeah.
Can you imagine if that happened for a whole park?
Yeah.
Like just
Yeah,
hey,
we're not
we're not going to open
opening.
again.
Oh my gosh.
That is crazy. And people were stunned and outraged. The park had been open for over 100 years, and within a matter of 7 years of ownership between Six Flags and Cedar Fair, the park had been completely decimated and shut down. It's one of the craziest stories. Cedar Fair immediately began relocating rides where possible. So Thunderhawk was sent to Michigan's Adventure, Headspin went to Carowinds, and lastly, it was announced that Dominator would be moving to King's Dominion for the 2008 season. And unfortunately, many other coasters would meet a bitter end. While some coasters were relocated, some were not. This meant Villain, Raging Wolf Bob's, sorry Bob, and the historic Big Dipper coaster were all demolished. And
Oh.
it's very sad. I found this. So here's the fate of Geauga Lake's coasters that I found. So Beaver Lake or Beaverland Mine Ride was sold to a park in France. Big Dipper was listed for auction on eBay, failed to receive a bid. Like just nothing. Like they just demolished it. Didn't get any compensation out of it. Dominator was relocated. Double Loop was demolished, sold for scrap for $25,000. Headspin is at Carowinds, still there to this day. What else? Raging Wolf Bob's was demolished, purchased for $2,500 for scrap.
Oh my gosh.
You and I could have bought the scrap of that roller coaster. That is insane. $2,500, and that's it. So it does look like some of it was donated to this Coaster Universe Preservation Museum and was fully restored. So some of the cars are preserved at a museum, which is cool. I'm glad that happened. So
yeah, I mean, because that's what history,
mm-hmm.
and it's just like no, I'm tearing it down.
It's very sad. It's the thing that's difficult is steel coasters are a lot easier to relocate than wooden coasters, just because of
Right.
the nature of the beast, right?
Right.
It's easy to pour more cement footings for the large steel structures, but wooden coasters have a lot more support beams to deal with, and some do get relocated. Like Phoenix at Knoebels was relocated from a park in Texas. But even that was extremely difficult to do, and yeah, it doesn't happen very often. So it's unfortunate some of these old wooden coasters that they just demolished, and that's the end of it. So
it makes me sad.
It actually happened in Branson. There was a park called Celebration City. I don't know, have I told you about this? That was owned by Hershend, but like there just wasn't enough demand for two major parks in Branson, and so when they closed that park down, the steel coaster that was there they were able to sell to another park, but the wooden coaster Ozark Wildcat, they just tore it down.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist anymore. It's crazy. So Villain also sold to Cleveland Scrap for $2,500. Crazy. So, and then like we said, Steel Venom was relocated, Thunderhawk relocated, and X Flight relocated. So that is crazy. There's been a lot of debate about what Cedar Fair's true intentions were with Geauga Lake. A lot of people have accused Cedar Fair of purchasing the park purely to get rid of competition.
Interesting.
So rather, because if you to think about what the alternative was, if Six Flags had put Worlds of Adventure up for sale and Busch Gardens had purchased it,
oh man,
like that would you'd have the major Busch Gardens park an hour and a half away from Cedar Point. That is not what Cedar Fair would want at all, obviously.
Right.
Or if Hershend had bought it, it would make sense that Cedar Fair would purchase the park, but also to purchase it just to run it to the ground is, I don't know. And obviously, there's no one's admitted to anything. Cedar Fair won't admit to it,
Right.
so
They
it's
never will.
yeah, it's all speculation. Uh, so it is really interesting to think about. I watched this video yesterday, and basically their conclusion was they don't think Cedar Fair bought the park with the intention of running it to the ground. Otherwise, they wouldn't have built a water park there, right? Their opinion is Cedar Fair bought it and they figured if it turns a profit and we can keep Cedar Point and this park separate, then great. And if it doesn't, then we'll just move the rides to other parks.
Huh.
And I mean, they only bought the park for $145 million, which really is not that much for how big the park was and how many coasters they got out of it.
Yeah.
It's really $145 is or $145. $145 million is not that much. So it's interesting. It's a story that's talked a lot about in the industry, is the fate of Geauga Lake and whether Cedar Fair's, what their true intentions were in purchasing the park.
Mm-hmm.
So, as announced, Dominator was moved to King's Dominion. It received a brand new paint job, logo, and beautiful new plaza, which I think that plaza looks great. I like that. I was just looking at the logo for the old Dominator. I like the new logo a lot better.
Do you have a picture of the new logo?
Let's see, I had it at the front here. So I mean that's the new logo.
Oh yeah.
So it looks just a lot more modern, a lot cleaner. It looks really good. So so yeah, that's what it looks like nowadays. One thing that is interesting that I don't know if you noticed when we were there, but the massive 135-foot vertical loop is yellow instead of orange.
Oh, I didn't know that there, but I see it now.
Do you know why?
No.
Because that is the original paint job from when it was at Geauga Lake.
Interesting.
So if you come back here, where's a better picture? You can see it. Here it is right here.
Yeah,
while it's at Geauga
yellow.
Lake. It's yellow because its original theme was Batman. And so when they changed it from Batman to Dominator, they just kept the same paint scheme. So it was like a yellow and blue. So when they brought it to King's Dominion, they painted it orange except for the loop, kind of to pay tribute to its original history at Geauga Lake.
Cool.
Isn't that cool?
I like that.
So, and the ride still operates at King's Dominion to this day. Ride experience is as follows. Riders board 4 across 32 passenger trains. After a small drop out of the station, the train takes a right turn into the 157-foot lift hill. After a small pre-drop, the train takes a diving turn to the right as it drops 148 feet at 65 miles an hour. Riders then enter the 135-foot vertical loop, which is actually the 3rd biggest vertical loop in the country, which is cool. Exiting the loop, the train follows a low-to-the-ground bank turn to the right, followed by another bank turn to the right that goes up and over the station. The train exits the turn and hits a cobra roll, followed by an upward turn to the left into the mid-course brakes. Following the brakes, the train follows a small drop before entering the interlocking corkscrews. After running through both corkscrews, the train follows a small upward turn to the left before diving into a low-to-the-ground bank turn. The track then goes through a small S-curve before jumping over a small hill into the final brakes. Now, I was looking at articles to kind of see this area, so the Virginia area's response to Dominator being opening at King's Dominion, and I saw this article where he was talking about the announcement that Dominator would be opening, and the article kind of posed it as like a brand new coaster. He didn't make any mention of it being relocated from another park, which doesn't necessarily mean he was hiding anything. It just means he may have not known. King's Dominion obviously wouldn't make it obvious in their announcement, like, hey, we're getting this hand-me-down from from a park that shut down in northern Ohio. That's they would obviously not do that. So, but the funniest part about it was, so I read that article, and then I found an article like a week later where it was like people were responding to the editor, and like the editor would put their responses in the paper. this guy, this guy is clearly a coaster enthusiast because listen to this comment. It says, regarding your brief article this past Wednesday about King's Dominion's new coaster, Dominator, it is not new, as the article suggested. It is in fact a used Bollinger and Mabillard floorless coaster from Geauga Lake in Ohio. Cedar Fair, the owner of King's Dominion, closed Geauga Lake at season's end last year. And he just goes on this spiel, and I just I just totally hear this coaster enthusiast like you push up his glasses like, well, actually, this is not this is not a
You're
new
not
coaster.
that bad.
Oh, I'm not that bad. That's
No.
good. The editor's response is funny too. It's like, fascinating update. Thanks for the input. I guess we'll have to call Dominator quote unquote new to us roller coaster. Hope that you'll get to enjoy it when it's up and running. So I thought that was funny. Just this coaster enthusiast making sure the editor got his facts straight.
Of course.
That's important.
Yeah.
So, ever since its opening at King's Dominion, Dominator brings in large crowds due to its prominence at the front of the park. It was also a big deal for the park in 2007 because they had just lost Hypersonic XLC the year before. So they lost a really big coaster that was at the park because it was just having nightmare maintenance issues. It was just way too expensive. So it was a big deal for King's Dominion to be getting another big coaster kind of to step into its place. Volcano was certainly the most popular coaster at the park, but Dominator was a solid number 2. Over the years, they built Intimidator 305 and Twisted Timbers, but in 2018, they lost Volcano, which is why we didn't get to ride it while we were there because it's not there anymore. And because of that, Dominator has remained a headline attraction at the park. You know, like I said, it's number 3 on most people's list at the park. And it has really high capacity because of the 4 across seating.
Right.
So it's, you know, people in the industry call it a people eater is the term that they use for coasters that
Okay.
for coasters that get a lot of people through, have really high capacity, they call it people eaters. So,
alrighty then.
and it's at the front of the park, the GP eat it up, right? They just see it
Right.
as they're in the parking lot and they're like, oh, we got to go do that first. So it always has one of the longest lines in the park. So
Not for us.
yep, that was one of the best parts about our trip. So all right, so that pretty much wraps up this saga for Dominator, but we got to talk about the rest of the Geauga Lake saga. We don't have too much more to talk about, but just to wrap up the rest of what happens. So the water park actually remained open until 2016, so they closed everything except for Wildwater Kingdom. Some rides were left abandoned, others demolished, and then after the water park closed, pretty much everything was demolished, and there's little that remains of the park. So I do have some pictures of what is left. So that's the front entrance to the park.
Huh.
You can see there's like, I think that looks like their River Rapids ride. What else? There's another picture of the front entrance, just overgrown with weeds and trees. There's the parking lot. You can see just these paths, but it's just all overgrown with bushes now. The shops. This looks like a ride here. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell what things are now anymore, but this is an interesting one. So there was a coaster here, clearly. I think this is where Dominator was, right here. And then, I don't know, there's some kind of ride
so
there.
Sad.
Isn't it? It's really sad. And then there's just that's a Google Maps overview of what it looks like today. Just completely desolate.
It's
just nothing there.
depressing.
This used to be the largest amusement park in the world, and it's just completely, it's just gone. It's insane. So, and I knew the reason I've known I wanted to talk about Dominator as our King's Dominion coaster for a long time, because I knew about this story. I knew where that it came from, this park. And to be fair, there's other coasters I could have talked about, because like there's one at Michigan's Adventure and one at Carowinds, one at Dorney Park that are from this park. But Dominator is really the big coaster that survived Geauga Lake.
Right.
And it's fascinating to have a coaster that outlived the park that it was built at. It doesn't happen very often. So, and as far as Six Flags is concerned, following the sale of Geauga Lake, Six Flags also demolished Six Flags Astroworld in Houston and sold the land for profit. There was also a hurricane that took out Six Flags New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina actually completely decimated that park, and it also sits abandoned to this day.
Oh, that's weird.
Six Flags almost sold Magic Mountain. I didn't even know that, but I guess they were considering selling Magic Mountain, that's like their Cedar Point, right? That's their flagship park. Ultimately, it was spared, but they sold off some of their smaller parks. So they sold off Kentucky Kingdom, Elitch Gardens. But Six Flags' obscene financial decisions eventually landed them in bankruptcy in 2009. Cash flow had decreased by $120 million annually, and the company was over $1 billion in debt.
Oh my gosh.
Unreal. So when you...
Well, it makes sense.
Yeah, right. So you asked me at the beginning of the episode if Premier Parks, buying all those amusement parks, put them in debt. It kind of did. I said yes and no because it wasn't Premier at that point. It was Six Flags, but yes, they did go into bankruptcy almost 20 years, like 15 years later because of these, just spending way too much money. The bankruptcy nearly ended Kentucky Kingdom because Kentucky Kingdom is partially, I'd have to look exactly how it's, the logistics behind it, but I think it's partially owned by the state and partially owned by whichever chain is running it. And so, like, Six Flags in the state of Kentucky were just
button heads.
Yeah, it was bad. And the park actually, I think, closed for a year, but then it was bought by somebody and kind of revived. And then it survived COVID barely, and then Hersham bought it last year. And so with Hersham buying it, it should be in a good spot now. Like, it should, now it's owned by a major chain.
That's one of the parks you really want to go to.
It is. Like, because we love Silver Dollar City, I want to check out the other Hersham parks. So Dollywood and Kentucky Kingdom are high on my list to go check out. So Six Flags did eventually recover. The board of directors was completely reformed in 2010. Since then, the company's purchasing habits have been much more calculated and conservative. Almost to a fault. Like, a lot of people say that Six Flags doesn't build anything exciting anymore. Like Toonbeely that we went on at King's Dominion.
Yeah.
Six Flags has bought like probably 12 or 13 of those, just putting them in all of the parks because they're cheap, they're easy to clone, and they're a crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
So, but for an enthusiast, not that exciting to see the same coaster put into every park in the country, right? So they have really changed their focus from coaster enthusiasts to focusing on the GP, which, if I had to say before I was an enthusiast what my opinion of Six Flags was, yeah, that's probably the opinion I would have had, is that they're all the same, they all have the same rides, which isn't true, but that's just the perception that I have of Six Flags parks before I was an enthusiast. So last thing, on August 25th, 2020, it was announced that there was a construction company that is actually, from what I hear, has purchased the land that Geauga Lake sits on and is planning on turning parts of it into housing developments. And in honor...
it is like prime property.
Right on the lake. I'm surprised it's taken this long for Cedar Fair to sell the land. But the company that's doing it said that they were going to name some of the streets Carousel Court and Dipper Way, kind of pay tribute to the old rides that used to be there, which I like. So hopefully,
it'd be cute if they even put just a little carousel or something .
Yeah, so
be cute.
Obviously, the ideal situation is that the park would still be there, but obviously that's never going to happen again. So if they can do something to just pay tribute to the park that used to be there, that's best situation at this point. So while today's story focused little on Dominator itself, the coaster is, it's a notable memory of a park that was meant to be the Disneyland of the North, and it's one of the few coasters to actually outlive the park. So yeah, that's the story of Dominator, and more importantly, the story of Geauga Lake and Six Flags Ohio and Six Flags Worlds of Adventure, and yeah, crazy story. One of the craziest stories in the amusement industry.
I could tell. It's crazy. So
yeah, I try to put myself in the shoes of somebody that had Geauga Lake as their home park, of if Silver Dollar City closed at the end of the year.
Looking at some of these houses, like, you know, to be able to say, like, yeah, well, the place we live at is where amusement park was. Like, that's cool.
Yeah. So I just can't imagine, like, the park that you grew up going to just closing without even a warning.
Yep,
like just
5 days after.
5 days after closing day, just, hey, park's never gonna open again.
Hope you got your rides in, because we're never opening again.
Yep, we're done. Crazy. So, well, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Airtime Traveler and the crazy story of Geauga Lake. And I do appreciate that at least some of the rides lived on. I wish more of the rides could have survived. Some of those wooden coasters no one will ever get to ride again, which is really sad. But at least we get a few. We get Dominator, and we get a few other parks that got to have one of these coasters from Geauga Lake. And do you have any final thoughts or questions or anything to add?
I don't think so. So I'm not as fond of the coaster as you are, but I did enjoy it, and I didn't know that they paid tribute by leaving it yellow in the one part, so I thought that was kind of cool.
I do really like that. I like when parks really, when we've talked about this with Powder Keg and with Phantom's Revenge, but when they put in the effort to pay tribute to old rides and old attractions, because I think I think some of these people in the amusement industry and the higher up positions forget that some of these rides aren't just a fun day at amusement park for some people. Like, some of these rides are memories with family and with friends. And
I mean, for Kennywood, people were getting married on the coaster.
Exactly. Some of these rides mean more to people than just a hunk of metal or a hunk of wood. They mean a whole lot. And like, for me, Outlaw Run always will have a special place in my heart as kind of symbolic of me overcoming my fears. And and anything at Disney has a special place in my heart as, like, spending time with family there, and got to spend my first vacation with you there. So these rides mean a lot to people, and so I appreciate when parks like King's Dominion put in the effort to pay tribute to how much these rides mean to people. And so I really like that they left the loop, the original paint job, in tribute to Dominator at Geauga Lake. So well, thanks everybody for tuning in to this episode of Airtime Traveler. Hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed that crazy story. And I actually don't know what park I'm going to talk about next time. So
not going to talk about Kings Island?
I don't think so. I think I'm going to leave Kings Island for maybe the episode or two after that. I thought about maybe doing something from Universal, because we did get to go to Universal for a couple days. So thought about doing something there. Maybe I'll go back to Disney, but I won't go to Magic Kingdom. I'll do Hollywood Studios or Animal Kingdom. I don't know. I haven't decided yet, but we'll have something new for you in a couple weeks. So be sure to follow us on Spotify, and so that way you're notified of any new episodes. Sometime between today's episode and the next episode, we will do a trip report of our experience at Kings Island. So you don't want to miss that, because we got a lot to talk about. A lot of coasters, a lot of awesome experiences. A couple things to complain about too, but that's okay. I think
parks has its perks and not so perks.
Yeah, no park is perfect, and that's okay. So
I don't know. Disney's pretty perfect.
I don't know. The prices are. I could complain about prices and lightning lanes, and
I guess that's true.
It's just too complicated nowadays. So it's but the experiences. I love the experiences at Disney. I just wish it could go back to the old days where all you had to do was book your fast pass in advance and you were good to go.
Yeah.
It's not that easy anymore.
No.
So that's okay. Like I said, every park has them. So be sure to also follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is just @Airtime Traveler, all one word. And I think that's pretty much all we have for this week. Do you have any final thoughts, Haley?
I was just gonna share, if you guys like our podcast, please don't be afraid to share it with your friends. We would love to hear some shout outs of what you think of it, and like we said, share it with your friends, and give us a comment or two on what your thoughts were on Dominator and the lake.
Oh, if you had a chance to go to Geauga Lake or
Yeah.
Worlds of Adventure before it closed, love to hear your experience with that, because neither of us obviously had a chance to go before all this went down. So
I wish I did. If it was, I guess your wife at that point,
Yeah.
then maybe I would have gone. But
I'm curious to know if Dominator runs, like if somebody's had a chance to ride Dominator before and after the relocation, like was it better beforehand? Is it about the same? Is it better now? I don't
Right.
know. It'd be interesting
that
to
would
see
be interesting.
if somebody got to ride that pre and post relocation. So.
Yeah, that'd be cool to find out.
Well, thank you everybody for tuning in to this week's episode, and we'll see you in the next episode of Airtime Traveler.